So you've been in this game for a while, huh?
Yeah, long time.
Okay.
1970.
From your vast experience, talk a little bit about what you see as some of the common challenges, faced by women of all faiths in terms of dealing with both women's rights as well as the subject matter today of violence against women.
Well, I think the common challenge that women across religions face is the challenge of patriarchy, or more specifically put, the challenge of the way in which religion has constructed what it thinks a woman is, what our nature is, and that's very much related to the way in which religions teach about sexuality. Another challenge that we face pretty universally, that's also very much in the present as opposed to historical, is that in almost all religions, the vast majority, if not all the clergy, are men. And their experience of what it means to be a leader, a person with ideas, a decider, comes through the lens of men. And those are the two biggest challenges: history and the present construction of gender within the religions.
Mm-hmm. Can women advocate for change based on their religious texts and traditions in regards to violence against women?
I think that we can do that, and I think certainly Christian women have very much used the Bible in a general sense on this issue. And the things that we point to, of course, are the nonviolent nature of the teachings of Jesus Christ, whether applied specifically to women or not, the peaceful nature of religion. We also use many of the stories of the Bible in which Jesus interacted with women indicate a kind of compassion for women and a gentleness and respectful approach to them, whether we're dealing with Jesus' relationship to Mary Magdalene, whom most people see as basically a prostitute, and someone who they would have expected a religious leader to be at least verbally violent to, if not physically chastise. So those kinds of stories in the Christian text, and I'm sure there are comparable stories in other texts that can be used as part of advocacy. But I don't think that in the modern world, a religious feminist needs to rely solely on religious texts. I think the notion that people in religion or leaders in religion have not been touched by psychology, by human experience, by the criminal justice system, by sociology, that by medicine, that all of the fields of modern life can be brought to bear and used within a religious context. Religious people should not be ghettoized or siloized in the sense that the only thing we care about is what was said in a religious book 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In your view, what's the most effective strategies for dealing with as well as influencing religious hierarchies and ideally, building allies among them?
I don't think this is an easy task, so I think we have to start with that. I think that there is, within religion, there is a very strong historic sensibility that women are inferior to men. And it plays itself out in almost every religion. Even within Buddhism, you don't find very many in traditional Buddhism, as opposed to Western Buddhism. You don't find very many religious leaders who are women. You find this notion of women as unclean permeates throughout the religious traditions. There are things that modify it, but that is also there. So I think this is a particularly difficult task. However, I think that first of all, I think one has to talk, that women have to speak out in religious settings about their experience as women of being marginalized or violated. Those stories are very, very powerful. The nature of religion really, in many ways, is narratives. Religion is about storytelling. It's not so much about dogma. Dogma gets in the way, but in reality, what it is the Bible is a series of stories. And this is true in many faith groups where these stories exist. And so women telling their stories is a very important strategy for change. Another strategy for change is that some women have to stay within religion, which is not always easy. There is a desire to, abandon that which is so often corrupted, particularly in relation to your own identity and your own self. But it is only through staying within, not only, but one of the things that's important is staying within and engaging in a discourse with the religion. Another strategy is really public exposure. I think that, we like to talk about the nice strategies, like we're going to have a dialogue and we're all going to be nice to each other and everybody's going to listen. But we certainly have seen within the Catholic Church, when you look at this issue of sexual abuse of children, both boys and girls, I think we hear more about the boys than the girls, and also the sexual abuse of adult women by priests and clergy, that it wasn't enough to talk behind closed doors. One had to use the power of the media to bring to accountability, which still is not complete, the Roman Catholic hierarchy, that the desire within these religions to maintain the status quo and to brush under the carpet these issues of violence is very strong. And so you have to work the outside as well as working the inside.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the where we are in terms of the push for women's equality within the church.
Well, this is a question. The question of women's equality within the church is very much related to each and every denomination. I don't think there is any doubt that almost all advocates of women's equality working within religions would say that their struggle for equality is still in process, and that even where women have been ordained to ministry, that they still are not equal in their voice and in their administrative or management capacity within faith groups. So this effort for equality at the professional level is very mixed. Of course, in Roman Catholicism, the level for the search for equality at that level is very, very retrograde. We are not. The last pope said that even talking about ordaining women is forbidden. This is the wrong thing to do. And the current Pope, Pope Benedict, recently issued a document in which he compared, he put at the same level the sin of sexual abuse of children and the sin of women attempting to be ordained, as if they were the same thing. So the struggle for equality within Roman Catholicism is really a very difficult one. The other elements, but I don't think equality for women rests just in the issue of the ability, although it's very important that women are ordained and seen equally as leaders. And of course, until women are equal leaders with men, problems around equality will exist at other levels. For example, in Roman Catholicism, the Roman Catholic Church will not acknowledge that women's rights are human rights. The preferred term is that men and women are equal in dignity, but the term equal in rights is never used. So conceptually, we still have an enormous way to go within Roman Catholicism, and I would say in other religions, in terms of the acceptance of women as equal beings. I think what we need to do, again, is in this area of the links between secular or civil society and religious institutions, is we need to bring to bear in religion that which we know from the civil society. And it also means that women of faith themselves need to behave as equals within the religion, assume power. No powerful system gives up power willingly. Now, I don't think this means that we have to, take up a hatchet and go into church and start that kind of violent revolution. But it does mean that what we need to do is we need to behave in ways that reflect the fact that we believe that we are equal within the churches.
In terms of some of the positions taken by particularly the Catholic Church, and I'm referring obviously to abortion and incest, etc., what do you see as the relationship between those positions and violence against women?
The positions that are taken by the Catholic Church in relation to reproduction, sexuality, gender, are very serious contributors to violence against women. I think when we talk about violence against women, every religion, including Roman Catholicism, would say, we're not for violence against women. We're horrified by violence against women. No one should strike a woman, etc., etc., etc. But when you look at the opposition to the use of contraception by women, when you look at the absolute prohibition of divorce and remarriage within Catholicism, the absolute prohibition of abortion, and you look at what is behind those positions, it is a belief that women were the source of evil in the universe. Let's be clear. This is about Adam and Eve and sexuality. And the reason most people would say Adam and Eve were kicked out of paradise was because Eve tempted Adam. Women are sexual temptresses. Men, of course, are weak, which doesn't get dealt with too often, but men are weak and therefore subject to these temptations. And therefore, women need to be controlled. And this conception of how sin originated, the relationship of sin to sexuality, and women as the source of sexual temptation, has throughout history justified efforts to control women's lives. And the use of violence is not excluded from those methods of control. It was just 15 or 20 years ago that the Pope canonized a woman, made her a saint, who had been in an abusive marriage. She was in a 20, 30-year abusive marriage where physical violence was frequent. She occasionally left her husband and she came back to him. And she was made a saint. Now, if she had been made a saint because she suffered abuse, there might be something of a role model against abuse in that. But she was made a saint because she suffered the abuse and stayed in the marriage. Messages like that, at the highest level of Roman Catholicism, make it clear that at best there is a certain ambiguity about where on the priority list preventing abuse and violence against women is, as opposed to preventing certain positions of the church.
This is, as you may know, the 10th anniversary of WLP. what would you say is some of the value that WLP offers to women's rights movement in general?
Well, I think that the greatest value that I have seen in WLP over its 10 years of existence is really its deep commitment to intellectual and strategic inquiry into issues related to women's lives, their human rights, and their development. That there is no organization, internationally or domestically, within the broad women's movement that has as firm an intellectual base and scholarly, strategically scholarly base as does the Women's Learning Project. And it is coupled with a commitment to training and activism at the local level. It's not just intellectual or scholarly exploration for an abstract purpose, but that work is put into practice. And that, to me, is the best contribution the institution has made.
Looking forward, you've had certainly yourself have done a lot of work in this area, but what's your hope for the next generation?
Well, my hope for the next generation is that they take charge. I'm one of these people who believes that, I said earlier in this interview, that's probably when you said it earlier, it's not going to work, but, I think no power structure gives up or shares power completely voluntarily. And the feminist movement is no different. And so the notion that feminist leaders of my generation, by and large, are going to hand their torches over to 27-year-old and 30-year-old women is a bit romantic. Not that whether we should or we shouldn't is another issue. But every group of people who have gotten power have gotten it by taking it. And so my hope is that the next generation concentrates on what kind of power it wants to exercise and proceeds to exercise that power and doesn't wait for old fogies like me to give it to them.